The Friends of Farm Foundation program can help you further expand your network with a diverse group of food and agriculture leaders. Entry-level benefits include virtual networking sessions, while contributions at the upper levels unlock additional benefits, such as a personalized tour of our new Innovation and Education campus. Help us celebrate 90 years of making a positive impact on the future of agriculture. Visit farmfoundation.org to explore the benefits of becoming a friend and supporter of Farm Foundation today.
Good morning. Thank you for joining us today for our Farm Foundation Forum, What to Expect from the 2023 Farm Bill Now. We are glad to have the opportunity to engage with you and are thankful to Farm Credit for their support of this forum. My name is Martha King, and I am the Vice President of Programs and Projects at Farm Foundation, located just outside of Chicago, Illinois. I'm looking forward to today's discussion, which will provide an updated forecast into the current factors influencing how the next Farm Bill is being shaped and what the likely policy outcomes will be. Before we get into today's program, I'm going to take just a few moments to share a bit more about Farm Foundation. We are a 501c3 nonprofit working at the intersection of agriculture and society to address challenges that affect the entire food and ag value chain. Specifically, we are an accelerator of practical solutions for agriculture, accelerating people and ideas into action. This year, we are celebrating 90 years of doing this work. The three levers we use to accomplish this are policy, innovation, and education. Forums such as today's are just one part of our extensive program of work, which is guided by our mission to build trust and understanding at the intersection of agriculture and society, and our vision to build a future for farmers, our communities, and our world. We rely on partnerships to fund our work and increase our impact. So if you're interested in learning more about funding or partnering with us, I invite you to reach out to explore collaboration. Now, I'd like to take a minute to highlight our Friends of Farm Foundation program. With your enrollment as a friend, you will not only be helping to support the mission and vision of Farm Foundation, but you will also gain exclusive benefits such as first reads of our issue reports, networking opportunities, and much more. Being a friend is an investment in building a better future for farmers, our communities, and our world. To learn more about being a friend of Farm Foundation, go to farmfoundation.org/friends. The link will also be posted in the chat. In addition to learning more about Farm Foundation and our work by visiting our website, we encourage you to connect with us on our social media platforms. If you are posting on social media about this morning's session, we ask that you please use #FarmFoundationForum. And finally, a few housekeeping notes. There will be an audience question and answer session at the end. We will be using the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen and not the chat to queue questions. This forum is being recorded and will be posted on our website at farmfoundation.org, as well as on our YouTube channel. We'll send out that link following today's program. When the forum concludes, you will receive a link to a brief survey. We appreciate your feedback and your time in completing the survey. Now let's turn to today's forum topic, the 2023 Farm Bill. Today's outstanding panel has a front row seat on this topic from a variety of perspectives. It's an ever-changing situation, and we look forward to their insights and where things stand today. It's now my pleasure to introduce as our moderator and discussion leader, Jonathan Coppess. Jonathan is the director of the Gardner Agriculture Policy Program and associate professor of law and policy in the Department of Agricultural and Consumer Economics at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. Prior to joining the University of Illinois, Jonathan served as chief counsel for the U.S. Senate Committee on Agriculture, Nutrition, and Forestry, administrator of the Farm Service Agency at the U.S. Department of Agriculture, and as a legislative assistant to U.S. Senator Ben Nelson. He is also one of the authors of the 2022 Farm Foundation issue report on the upcoming Farm Bill, which you can find on the Farm Foundation website. We're so pleased to have you as our moderator today. Jonathan?
Well, thank you, Martha, and thank you to the Farm Foundation for having me on and for hosting this forum, which could not be more timely and more relevant to the conversation. On a personal quick note, I managed to hurt my back over the weekend, so bear with me if I seem grumpier than normal. And to my fellow panelists, if I wince or make a facial expression, please don't take it personally. It's probably not something you said. So anyway, with that out of the way, let's get through the material. So I'm going to kind of set the stage a little bit, with a little bit of background and history, and so we can jump into this. So one of the things that we always sort of emphasize, and if you take a dive through history, you can see that one of the main political strengths of any farm bill is really this coalition that is formed over time. And if Congress were to reauthorize a farm bill this year in 2023, we'd actually mark this as 90 years. The first farm bill, as we recognize it, the first farm bill was the Agricultural Adjustment Act of 1933. So we're looking at 90 years of history around this and experience around this. I think that's probably an important point to keep in mind. It's not always been smooth sailing, but it certainly has been an impressive historical run. If we build out this, if we look at this coalition, how it built out over time, really the farm portion of this coalition, the farm interest groups come together in the 1920s. By the 1960s and 1973, we're adding the food assistance side of this. So this is the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program and the 40-some million Americans that receive assistance through it. The large program really builds up after 1964. And then we complete this coalition in 1985 by making a permanent authorization for conservation programs in the Food Security Act of 1985. So you can see we've been at it for 90 years, but we've built this coalition over time. And it is a real political strength on the House and Senate floor to be able to count the votes around these areas, topics, programs, policies, and interests. So it is a strong political coalition if it can be held together and is not torn apart. We jump to the next slide. We can look at some more recent history. And there's 2 points to really take away from this. One, the fact that it typically does take more than one Congress in 1 year to get a farm bill done. So if in fact we get into extension territory or this drags out past 2023, we are not in an anomalous situation. We go back 25, 30 years to the mid-90s. We see the agricultural or the Fair Act, the Farm Bill in 1996 began in 1995, complicated by budget issues. The 2002, what became the 2002 Farm Bill really began being debated in 2001. So that stretched over multiple years. Again, what became the 2008 Farm Bill started in 2007. And the current record holder for the longest stretch is the Farm Bill that got enacted in early 2014. And it really began in 2011. It was supposed to have been reauthorized in 2012. So we can see that, that longer stretch. And then the 2018 Farm Bill is actually the only one in recent history that has been reauthorized within the year of the expiration. It was December of 2018, and the 14 Farm Bill obviously expired or was scheduled to expire in 2018. And the other thing to take away from this then is that coalitional component, and frankly the real downsides if that coalition is being torn apart or is at odds with each other. And so both the 2014 Farm Bill and the 2018 Farm Bill suffered defeats initially on the House floor and largely over this controversial sort of partisan fight about the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. Again, that low-income assistance for food purchases. And so we have seen 2 straight farm bills really struggle with the coalition on the House floor in particular, and that certainly raises a whole lot of questions about this 2023 process and what we've been seeing. We jump to the next slide. We'll kind of do a quick overview of where we stand. This is my foggy, cloudy outlook for a farm bill, the prospects of which are in serious doubt. I always like to point out, it's very cloudy. We also don't quite know what's over the edge. That could be a cliff, a very steep cliff, or just a little drop off. So a lot of concern about the status of things. And if we really boil this down to the 2 chambers in the House, we are watching this far right faction of House legislators, particularly in the Republican caucus, who have been holding things up. They've been holding up appropriations bills. They're currently threatening the CR. This goes all the way back to the debt limit fight early in the spring. And so we have an incredibly difficult political hurdle in the House and on the House floor. We are, as most anybody who follows this stuff knows, we are barreling towards a government shutdown here this weekend. And we're not sure whether the House will go through a 3rd round of this fight over SNAP. In the Senate, we don't see those same set of problems. We have much more of a contained set of issues within the committee, really, and in the farm policy sector. And the real question here is around the price triggered payment programs to farmers, known as the Price Loss Coverage Program, and those fixed reference prices that are in the statute. And when prices fall below it, those trigger a payment. And there's been a strong demand, there's been some demand, I guess, for increasing those reference prices. That comes with a significant cost and a significant set of political challenges under current budgeting rules. And that is largely due to the requirement that the committees reauthorize a farm bill within the 10-year budget projections the Congressional Budget Office provides. And if they increase spending in any area, they have to cut something. They have to reduce spending elsewhere to offset those increases. And what really makes this complicated is we are talking about not 1 year or not even the 5 years a farm bill would be authorized in, but a 10-year budget window. And if we jump to the next slide, I'll give a quick overview of this. There's sort of thousands of challenges we seem to have with how to deal with CBO. So I put an article out last week on the Farm Doc Daily website as I sort of trying to sort through this a little bit. And I can't do it justice in this quick intro, and maybe we get into some questions with the experts here on the panel. But one of the things that jumps out at me that is a real challenge with how the budgeting rules collide with sort of the Farm Bill authorization and policy writing process. And here's an example of it. The May 2023 CBO baseline projects out over 10 years, and this is what we have to spend with. This is looking at just Title I programs, so just those direct farm assistance payments, the ARC, Agricultural Risk Coverage Program, and the Price Loss Coverage Program that we mentioned, as well as dairy and the Livestock Disaster Program. And CBO is projecting that about $65 billion will be spent in those programs over the next 10 years, and that's the baseline for that program. Now, if you want to increase spending, like raising reference prices, you have to offset whatever CBO projects those increased costs to be. And that is also a 10-year scoring challenge. And so we look at that over time. We try to understand how that works. And I think maybe what I'm trying to, or maybe one of the issues that really we run into and bogs us down is not just the scoring mess, but the fact that most of the spending in these programs are actually in years after the Farm Bill would expire. So if they write it in 2023, we'd expect it to expire in 2028, but CBO projects for 10 years because that's what congressional budget law requires. And we see a bunch of that spending in the out years. So one of the struggles is making changes in these programs do not just cost the committee in the years the programs are authorized, it costs them for 5 years after. So you may be trying to find a way to afford projections well after a Farm Bill would expire. And I think that is one of the challenges we're seeing. We can jump through. I just sort of tried to illustrate that in a quick graph. Again, where those heavy spending years are and how it would fall outside of the Farm Bill authorization. So that's just some quick food for thought. I think that was all I had to run through, and I want to be able to get the other panelists in here as quickly as we can. So thank you again to the Farm Foundation for having me on, and to the panelists for their participation. From that, I think we will begin by handing this over to Emily. So our first panel, there you are. Emily, welcome. Emily is the economist for the House of Representatives Committee on Agriculture, policy analyst for the Subcommittee on Livestock and Foreign Agriculture and the Subcommittee on Biotechnology, Horticulture, and Research. Emily earned her master's degree from the University of Missouri, and is going to kick us off with the panelists. So again, thank you, Emily. Thanks for joining this panelist, and the floor is yours.
All right, thank you, Jonathan. Really happy to be here, and also would love to clarify that I work for the committee for the ranking member, David Scott, on the Democratic staff, and I don't know that we have a Republican on today. So I'll go ahead and hop into a little bit of the House perspective. So looking at the 2018 Farm Bill, the authorizing legislation expires on Saturday. And I think it's important that we talk about what that actually means for us. While the authorizations generally expire at the end of the fiscal year, which is this Saturday, specific titles and programs vary. The authority for Title I and dairy support programs, so that includes like the dairy margin coverage program, as well as ARC and PLC in the crop space, will continue to function normally until December 31st. Looking at the conservation programs authorized in Title II of the Farm Bill, we were able to extend those through fiscal year 31 as part of the Inflation Reduction Act. So without a Farm Bill, which at this point will not be possible to pass by Saturday, those programs will continue to run as normal. the Federal Crop Insurance Act, which authorizes RMA and continues those programs, has a permanent authorization and funding. So we will not be running into an issue there. And then the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, known as SNAP, formerly known as food stamps, runs with appropriations. So if at the end of this week we are experiencing a government shutdown, that will become another conversation about the ability of the government to continue to fund that program. However, as long as we get through appropriations, whenever that process is done, that will continue to operate as well. So between now and the end of the year, where we run into issues are the 19 programs with mandatory funding that do not have baseline. So in Congress, we generally call these orphan programs, where if the pot of money they were given in 2018 runs out, then those programs will temporarily cease. There are also a couple of smaller authorizations, including programs like the dairy forward pricing, where contracts that are already existing will continue, but processors and folks in the agriculture field will not be able to enter into new contracts until we reauthorize it. So that is the current state of the Farm Bill and expiration, and it puts a lot of pressure on us to not reauthorize right now, but by the end of the year, and either finish a conferenced Farm Bill, which will be really tight at this point in time, or to do a short-term CR. So with that in mind, I think I can jump forward on my slides. We'll take a look at the Farm Bill timeline in the House. My Senate colleagues will be able to give a better description of what that looks like in the other half of Congress. But at this point in September, we only have 3 days left on the legislative calendar. Voting days are marked in blue here for the next 3 months. And I really do think that the appropriations process will take all of the votes this week and potentially move forward. If we experience a government shutdown, the list of things to get across the floor will all be pushed back. We can't pass a Farm Bill until we're through the appropriations process completely and the government is fully functioning. And we have a very limited number of days in the rest of this calendar year after we finish appropriations to completely pass NDAA as well as FAA, and then hopefully we'll be able to find floor time for the Farm Bill. Chairman Thompson has said that the Farm Bill isn't going to be marked up in committee or have the text released until there's scheduled floor time. So we will get that from Republican leadership and end up working back for a markup and working back in front of that for when Farm Bill text will be released. There are a lot of pieces that are still pretty uncertain here. So we are trying to figure out exactly when that might be, but it really depends on the appropriations process and how long a potential government shutdown would last. Moving forward, let's take a look at some of the pieces in the Farm Bill. So starting off with the Farm Bill baseline that was projected by CBO back in May. This is the general amount of money that we have to work with. I will note that this specific graph does not include the conservation funding or rural development funding provided in the Inflation Reduction Act. So this is strictly money that has previously been authorized in Farm Bill, and we may be able to work on creating additional baseline by transferring IRA programs, but that's still really a developing conversation. We are limited to this number, especially after losing quite a bit of other funding that we were counting on for Farm Bill programs in the debt limit deal in June. And other constraints in the House rules, we call them the Scalise rules, where any additional funding not only needs to have a payoff in mandatory programs, but also discretionary programs that are funded through appropriations, not directly through the Farm Bill, need to have an offset. For example, if we were to create a new program in rural development, we would have to find another program that has been funded in the past, cut that program, and then stand up the new one without guaranteed funding. In this situation, it makes it quite a bit harder to negotiate and also very hard to stand up new programs when we're looking at cutting ones that have been funded and have been successful so far. All right, moving on to the next slide. It is very important to the Democrats in the House and on committee to support a farm safety net that is making sure to support small farmers and family farmers. In an ideal world, we would be able to move away from some of the really high ad hoc payments like MFP under the Trump administration and just have a more level, consistent safety net where in times of disaster or really low prices, farmers are able to be more completely supported by those existing programs. We also really believe that a strong safety net does include programs outside of just crop insurance that help small farmers stay in business. So my boss, Ranking Member Scott, has been working towards creating programming for procurement and development for smaller producers and giving them alternate ways to bring their product to market. We're also trying to incentivize small farmers who haven't participated in insurance programs before to make that choice and have a higher level of protection. I think we're all very aware that the reference prices set in the past don't keep pace with both the changing farm economy and inflation, but the changes are expensive. And while we have quite a few members who are advocating for higher reference prices, we need to make sure that we're making any of those changes without taking that money from farmers who are voluntarily doing conservation practices or from families who are using programs in the Farm Bill to buy food. All right, let's move forward again to the next slide. And we'll also take a peek into Title II and conservation funding. So the Inflation Reduction Act was a very, very big win for farmers and for Democrats both in the House and the Senate. The $18 billion in additional funding for existing Farm Bill conservation programs was the highest historical investment in on-farm practices. And that is something that our members are very, very excited about and determined to protect in this Farm Bill. We see overall Farm Bill funding for Title II conservation in blue on the graph, and a very large increase through IRA funding. So while we're having conversations about the possibility of injecting that IRA funding into Title II of the Farm Bill to establish permanent baseline and be able to turn a one-time investment into something longer term, our members are also very determined and drawing a red line in the sand that this funding needs to stay in the conservation space. All right, let's move on to the next slide. Another very big priority for Democratic members in the House is the continuation of support at the same levels for the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, also known as SNAP. We saw some pretty big changes in the debt ceiling in June, where there were additional work requirements for low-income folks between the ages of 50 and 54. This was part of the deal with the far-right Republicans to make sure that we didn't default on our country's debt. At the same time, Democrats were able to get a win in the fact that this deal reduced work requirements for very key at-risk groups. That includes reduced work requirements for veterans, as well as folks who are homeless and youth who have recently aged out of foster care, where this may be a really important obstacle. In previous bills, there has been pressure for additional work requirements. This is a very hard line for House Democrats. We really believe that this was a conversation that was handled in the debt ceiling bill, and additional conversations and proposals from the far right Republicans to increase work requirements even more as a way to try to take benefits away from people trying to feed their families is not a conversation that many Democrats in the House are willing to continue. Nutrition is also very necessary for the bill to pass. We saw both in 2014 and 2017 conversations around splitting the coalition for the farm programs and having a separate SNAP bill on the House floor, and even saw it split in 2017, where the bill failed in the House. We believe that the coalition between urban and rural members is absolutely necessary to pass a farm bill, and that is something that is a continued dynamic in 2023. Moving on to the next slide. Our members really appreciate the work that the administration has done with the Thrifty food plan. So the Thrifty food plan reevaluation was a recalculation of the market basket that economists used to figure out exactly what should be paid out for SNAP. And the reevaluation helped to decrease the gap between the SNAP benefit and then the cost of a meal for families in today's world. For this reevaluation, Congress based it on a provision in the 2018 Farm Bill that required it to be based on food prices, food composition data, consumption patterns, and a dietary guideline. And while there have been quite a few discussions about how Republicans who wrote that were expecting cost neutrality, that was not a requirement of the bill. And we're really excited that SNAP has come a little bit closer to meet the minimum needs of people who are just looking to feed their families. Let's move on to the next slide. One area that I spent a lot of time working on is research funding. And this is also an area where the US has been lagging behind because we don't have enough funding to put into the Farm Bill baseline. We've been lagging behind other countries, including China and Brazil. And in the last fiscal year, China outspent US in public ag research from 2 to 1. When we look at top line funding over the past 20 years, when we adjust it for inflation, research funding in agriculture has decreased, which is really unfortunate, especially when we look at a couple ERS studies that have estimated very large returns on investment in public ag research. Our members are looking to prioritize investing in research in the Farm Bill as well. And while we're running into an issue of having funding as well as struggling to fund both land grant institutions from 1962 along with 1890s, which are the historically Black colleges and universities, and tribal colleges and universities in the land grant system. This is something that is very important to our members. We'll see on the next slide a breakdown of where that funding ends up going. Research and extension are areas that impact every single state and every single county in the United States. Land grant institutions are a very key part of the future of U.S. agriculture, and investments now will be able to provide a more sustainable, a more climate friendly, and a more affordable environment in agriculture for future generations of farmers. Then to move on to the next slide and wrap up some of the big areas that we have been discussing and going over in language for the next Farm Bill, it's very important for our members that we invest in communities. That looks both like rural development and local and urban agricultural programs, as well as some changes in processing and local procurement and incentivizing new sustainable practices. We are very much limited both by the rules from the far right in the House and figuring out where very limited funds will be able to go while protecting the programs that exist that members continue to care about and can't pass a farm bill without. All right, moving on to my last slide, looking at next steps. I talked about timeline a bit at the beginning, and we'll hear from my Senate counterparts about what that looks like on their side. And I think it's important to take away that urban members have supported farm bills because of SNAP. And while commodity conservation and rural development programs are really important for rural districts and really important for the future of our country, farm bills have passed in the past because of that coalition, and that's something that we need to honor in this next farm bill. Let's go ahead and direct follow-up questions to my email there if needed, but we will have a Q&A at the end. So Jonathan, I'll pass it over to the next panelist. Thank you.
Thank you, Emily. And again, as Emily mentioned, we've got three of what we call the four corners, the chairs and rankings of the House and Senate Ag Committee, the Chief Economist for the House Ag Committee, Chairman Thompson. I mean, it's kind of a busy stretch right now for Congress, and particularly with the shutdown looming. So he may or may not be able to join us, but we do appreciate getting the perspectives from both sides of the Hill and all four corners of the committee. And with that, we'll turn over to John Newton, who is the Chief Economist for the U.S. Committee on Agriculture, Nutrition, and Forestry, the United States Senate, for Ranking Member John Boozman out of Arkansas. John has served in a number of capacities over the last couple decades, including at USDA, the Department of Agriculture, also one-time stint here at the lovely University of Illinois, and most recently, just prior to joining the Ag Committee staff for Senator Boozman, he was the Chief Economist for the American Farm Bureau Federation. So John Newton, take it away.
Thanks, Jonathan. Appreciate the opportunity to visit with Farm Foundation today. Thanks for this webinar. And I'll say, Jonathan, I have been doing this for a couple decades. I hope I still look young. I'm getting a little bit gray in the beard area, but no, really do appreciate the opportunity to visit with you guys today and talk about Senator Boozman's priorities for this farm bill. And if we can go ahead and move to the next slide. One of the things I'll say is Senator Boozman and Senator Stabenow have an excellent working relationship. They meet weekly to talk about our progress on the farm bill. Our staffs have been meeting. I think we've had over 250, close to 250 staff level meetings, various titles of the farm bill, trying to make sure that we get our job done on time, make sure that we listen to our stakeholders and other members of the committee, their priorities. We had a portal open earlier where members of the committee could submit their priorities on the Farm Bill. But one of the other things that Senator Boozman's done over the last year and a half or so is he's traveled the country. He's probably traveled the country more than anyone, listening to producers, listening to conservationists, listening to foresters, listening to folks in the nutrition community on their priorities for this Farm Bill, what's working and what's not working on the Farm Bill. You can see all of these pins in the map or states that Senator Boozman has traveled to. He was in Florida yesterday. He was in Delaware last Friday. He had a bipartisan listening session with Senator Klobuchar. The listening session in Delaware was bipartisan with Senator Coons. So again, Senator Boozman has traveled the country. He's heard from producers just about everywhere on what their needs are and what their concerns are, quite frankly, in advance of this Farm Bill. We've also had 11 full committee hearings. We've had a hearing on just about every title of the Farm Bill where we had USDA experts provide testimony, and then we've had 10 subcommittee hearings with commodity organizations, conservation groups, all the various stakeholders with respect to the Farm Bill have had an opportunity to come in front of the committee or a subcommittee and highlight their priorities. And if we can move to the next slide, of all of those listening sessions, everywhere that Senator Boozman's been, one of the top concerns that producers have weighed in about is just the inflation that they're seeing on farm production expenses. If we look since the last Farm Bill, farm production expenses have increased by $114 billion. And it's every single category that farmers are paying. They're paying more for fertilizer, paying more for livestock feed, paying more for diesel fuel, paying more for labor, paying more for pesticides. Every single production expense is going up. Interest rates are going up at a rapid rate right now, one of the fastest rate hikes that we've seen in history, and that impacts farmers, impacts their cost of borrowing. So we've heard that everywhere we've gone, that farm production expenses are simply very, very burdensome. And when you pay so much to put a crop in the ground or care for livestock, you start to get concerned on where your safety net is, where the risk management tools that you depend on are. And if we move to the next slide, we had a farmer at one of our subcommittee hearings, a cotton producer from Texas, a young man. He said, our farm safety net is 2 inches above concrete. And what he means by that is when you spend $1,500, $1,300 to raise a crop, and you know that the commodity prices have to fall by 30, 40, in some cases, in the case of chickpeas or oats or corn, over 40% before it triggers a Title I program payment, you realize that's not much of a safety net. And again, we've heard that from producers all over the country that we visited with. We have stakeholders come in to visit with us weekly. We've been doing that since the pandemic, and those stakeholders have said our safety net just doesn't reflect the realities that we see on the farm. Production expenses are not going down. USDA ERS projects 2024 production expenses to go down only slightly. So we know that next year is going to be equally as expensive to put a crop in the ground or care for livestock, but we know commodity prices are already falling. If we move to the next slide, please. And that volatility persists across the whole farm economy. In 2023, USDA's projection for net farm income and net cash income is going to be the largest decline that we've ever seen in history. In the case of net cash income, even when you adjust for inflation, we're looking at the largest decline that we've ever seen. Now, we're coming down from historic highs, but it's also just very, very concerning the volatility that we have in the farm economy and where we may go moving forward. Commodity prices are falling, as I mentioned. It's just a very, very tough time when you think about where we could end up. U.S. agricultural exports, record large trade deficit this year, and then an even larger trade deficit next year. We know stockpiles are building. We're going to have the second largest corn crop of all time here in the United States. So we've got a lot of headwinds in agriculture. And so now's the time for the Farm Bill is to invest in the safety nets that producers depend upon, make sure we've got a strong Title I program, a strong crop insurance program, so that these tools reflect the risks that producers face in agriculture. If we move to the next slide, please. And just last week or the week before, University of Missouri FAPRI put out their expectations. They updated their baseline for where they think certain commodity prices are going to be next year. And if you look here, you can see from 2022 to 2024, the crop that producers are going to put in the ground next year, we're expecting an over 30% decline in corn, a near 30% decline in wheat, over 20% decline in soybeans, sharp decline in milk prices. Matter of fact, in 2023, that was the worst income over feed cost margin years that dairy farmers have ever seen. Their safety net's going to pay out a record amount because of how tough it is in the dairy economy today. Matter of fact, net cash income on dairy farms is falling over 80% this year compared to last year. So again, we know input costs remain very, very high. We know commodity prices are falling. And again, Senator Boozman has heard that everywhere. That's why it's his priority to address the safety net in the Farm Bill, address reference prices, address ARC County, address crop insurance, make sure it's more affordable. It's because of the feedback that he's heard from producers, whether they're here in Washington, D.C., or whether we're out in one of those listening sessions. If we move to the next slide, please. And this is what I mean by the Title I support doesn't reflect the reality on the ground today. What you see here, just of the range of cost of production estimates, actually this comes from our good friend Joe Outlaw at Texas A&M. They have representative farms that they monitor. And the average cost of production for corn range from around $3.50 to close to $7 per bushel. Soybeans, we're looking at $6 to close to $16 a bushel. Wheat, $4 to over $8 a bushel. And then you can see here, I've highlighted where their Title I PLC reference price support level falls in that range of production costs. And as you can see, it's not much of a safety net at all. And so, again, all the stakeholders that we've heard from said they'd like to see a meaningful increase in reference prices. That's Senator Boozman's number one priority. This Farm Bill is a meaningful increase in reference prices. We want to make some improvements to ARC County because a lot of producers lean on ARC County as their Title I safety net program, and then also look at crop insurance. Make sure it works for producers around the country, make sure it's affordable, make sure folks have the education they need so they can use all the available tools in the toolbox to deal with the risks that they face. And if we move to the last slide, please. Farm bills are not written for the good times. Jonathan's probably, how many farm bills he's done, I have no idea, but farm bills are written for the bad times. I think Joe Outlaw's done a number of farm bills too. He's probably got more than a few decades of experience, I would imagine. But farm bills are written for the bad times. And what I asked Texas A&M to look at, and they've got, again, 94 representative farms that they track. I said, look at what happens if we have a price decline like we had in 2012. What happens to those representative farms? And what you see is the probability of their real net worth declining by 2028 is significant if we see prices decline only slightly below their current expectations. So if we see prices follow a path like we saw coming out of the last golden age of the farm economy, like in 2012, you look at feed grains, your corn operations, 70%, over 70% of those operations will see their net worth declining over the projection period through 2028. Nearly 60% of wheat operations will be in the red. Cotton, over 80% of those operations, and close to 100% of rice operations will see their net worth decline over the life of this next farm bill, actually, if we see prices much lower than where they are today. So we know that now's the opportunity, this farm bill, to address the safety net for producers. If we don't do it now, producers will be stuck with the same safety net for the next 5 years. And by the time we get to that next farm bill, some of the information that we use to establish those reference prices will be over 15 years old by that point. So we know that now's the time, this farm bill, to address the risk management tools that producers need and depend on. And as Senator Boozman says time and time again, so they can go to the bank and the banker knows they've got the tools behind them in terms of risk management programs so they can get a loan and raise a crop. So I appreciate the opportunity to visit with you guys. Really look forward to the questions from the audience, and I will kick it back over to you, Jonathan.
Thank you, John. Appreciate the perspectives. And we will move over, stay on the Senate side, sorry. We'll move to Steve Wallander. Steve is a senior economist currently for the Senate Committee on Agriculture, Nutrition, and Forestry in the majority staff side for Chairwoman Stabenow. He's actually on detail from USDA. So Stephen's a USDA employee where he's the senior economist at the Economic Research Service. Over the past 14 years, Stephen has published research focused on land and water conservation, conservation program design, drought risk, irrigation, and climate change. Really appreciate you taking some time with us here this morning, Stephen. I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you very much. And thank you to Martha and the Farm Foundation. I'm happy to be here and provide another perspective on where things stand right now with the 2023 Farm Bill. And before I jump into some of the content on what the kind of key themes are that we're working around right now, I just want to add a little bit to some of the process that Emily and John both talked about, a little bit on the calendar, a little bit on the sort of how things are working together. Over the past 2 years, the staff on the committee has been getting feedback from all sorts of stakeholders. We've gotten thousands of recommendations, sometimes simple concepts, sometimes draft language from stakeholders. John mentioned the portal that opened in the spring. That got input from the senators on what their priorities were and some of their draft language. And then we've been working title by title and subtitle by subtitle through those recommendations, finding where the common threads are, sort of working out minor differences, and laying out the groundwork for negotiations around situations where the recommendations might be veering off in slightly different directions. And so that's what we've been doing over the past summer, working on drafting now. And we really hope we're on the same timeline as what we saw in 2018, and being able to roll out the sort of final package this fall. So next slide, please. I want to start by talking about something that Chairwoman Stabenow often brings up, and that is the idea that the Farms Bill is a jobs bill. And this is true across lots of the titles, but let's start with the nutrition title, which, as Emily mentioned, is the biggest piece of the pie in terms of projected outlays over the next 10 years. And the easiest way to vision the impact on jobs here is by looking at the Economic Research Food Dollar Series, which shows you, cents on the dollar, percent of spending that for food spending in general, where does it go? And you can see that as you increase that food spending, it cascades through the supply chain, right? You have spending and jobs in food services. You have a lot in the whole trade, both retail and wholesale trade. You have jobs in food processing, and then on the left side of that dollar, right, you have jobs in farm production, the foundation of that supply chain pyramid. And so when you have that additional spending in SNAP benefits and other nutrition programs, right, those are creating tens of thousands of rural jobs. An extra $1 billion of spending on SNAP creates over 500 jobs on the farm. And that's economic output throughout the ag sector. So while the primary goal is addressing the large problem of food insecurity in this country, it does have these ancillary benefits that make it all the way back to the farm. There are other portions of the Farm Bill that are important as a jobs bill. Certainly in the rural development space, there are multiple pathways, investing in broadband, bringing rural broadband up to appropriate standards. Emily mentioned a lot about the research title. Research and education is critically important to making sure that our solutions in the ag production space are tailored to local conditions. And the energy investments are also hugely important. Looking to the future of where things are going to be in the next 10 years and beyond, a critical piece of the puzzle for agricultural jobs and rural jobs is the bio-based economy. Looking at how our primary commodities and other commodities can expand the markets, can expand the value added. There are components of this in the working forest space. There are components in the marketing space, making sure that the markets for these products are expanded. And in the trade space, leveraging the big advantages of U.S. agriculture to look outward for where the demand can be for those bio-based products. So next slide, please. I'm going to springboard off of that last point a little bit and talk about the importance of the Farm Bill for investing in rural communities. The chart here on the right is adapted from the USDA study that was an impact analysis of where bio-based value added was in 2017 And you can see that when you combine the direct jobs and the indirect jobs coming from that, it's over 4.5 million jobs in that year. But the bio-based economy is just one of the many great opportunities we have for investing in rural America. One of the key inputs to ag, of course, is soil. So improving soil health, investing in regenerative ag, those are key pieces of laying the foundation for the future of rural communities. The technology piece, right? This returns us to that investment in education and research, tailoring technology to local conditions, local production systems, having that innovation, but making it work locally means having those local institutions. The clean energy piece is another great opportunity for rural America. They have tremendous resources on wind and solar, and the ability to build resilient energy systems that both provide energy to the entire economy, but also help improve the resilience of energy for agricultural production and build in some diversity in energy as an input to agriculture that lets them weather some of the shocks we've seen on the energy input side. This portfolio for investing in rural communities, the farm bills have historically been a critical part of this portfolio, but they play in concert with other major investments that we've seen recently, notably the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, the American Rescue Plan, and the Inflation Reduction Act. Next slide, please. These communities, of course, are both dependent on and feed into, provide services to the farms, the ranches, and the dairies and working forests. So what these are showing is that the farms and the ranches and the working forests are really in every title of the Farm Bill. They've been there historically since, as John mentioned, in 1933, when we started this whole process. And those titles are investing in productivity for these farms and ranches and dairies and working forests, but they're also making sure that the markets are working for them. And that in the food and nutrition space, as we saw, that feeds back into those farms and ranches. The menu of policies and programs has grown so diverse that one of the key things that the staff and the senators are working on this year is looking closely at program interactions and how programs that work together or slightly overlap at the margins can interact, and how you can work out some of those important pieces of the policy implementation puzzle through the authorizing legislation. So next slide, please. We just talked a lot about, in the previous presentations, the importance of the farm safety net, and that's where there are some really challenging interactions. There are many layers to the farm safety net. There are the commodity programs that have gotten a lot of attention. We used to talk about these a lot as sort of shallow loss programs, right? When the current iterations of the commodity, the ARC and PLC programs that cover about 20 commodities were brought in, right? They were really trying to target, in part, that deductible space that you had in crop insurance. Crop insurance was at the time more of a catastrophic coverage program. Crop insurance has changed a lot since then. It's expanded. There are many more affordable options for producers to buy up production. They've shifted more towards revenue protection and then added additional products that even lets you go further into that deductible space and select coverage. And importantly, crop insurance is covering 130 different commodities. And so there's a lot of space there for producers who don't necessarily have access to some of the traditional commodity programs. Within those two key layers of the farm safety net that work closely together, I want to highlight something in this chart here, and that is how those programs have built-in mechanisms to adapt to underlying market conditions. These are the scores for the 2018 Farm Bill, first on the left, right after it was enacted, and then where we were in the May 2023 baseline. And you can see that the total funding expected outlays over the 10-year period for Title I went up by about $8 billion. The expected outlays for Title XI went up by about $23 billion. There are lots of factors that went into this, but a big piece of this is that the programs, by and large, have a lot of levers within them that self-adjust to market conditions. The liabilities covered by crop insurance went up. The premiums went up proportionately to cover those liabilities. The coverage in ARC guarantee went up with the moving average after the couple years of high input prices. And even when we look at things like reference prices, in the 2018 Farm Bill, an escalator was added that created the effective reference price. So while $3.70 is where the statutory reference price is for corn, under the projections from CBO in 2025, 2026, and 2027, we're going to see an effective reference price of $4.26. So we want to take a close look at these mechanisms, these adjustment mechanisms that are in the laws, and see if they're working correctly, and see if other important adjustments might be needed in this version of the Farm Bill. Those aren't the only two pieces of the farm safety net, though. Emergency conservation programs play a critical role in helping producers and communities respond after major disruptive events that have impacts on soil and water resources. When we've been talking to producers this year about the concerns, some of the concerns that John mentioned about what if we see these big price declines in the coming years, we dig into what would be driving those price declines. What would we see? Trade is a major concern, right? We saw what happened with the retaliatory tariffs and changes in trade in 2019, and concerns are about a repeat of that. And we see where interest rates are now, hoping that the Federal Reserve is done with their reference price increases and we're settling into a more steady economy over the coming years. But the credit titles and the trade title are an important piece of the farm safety net. Circling back around a little bit to the rural development piece of things, right? For small farms, farms with families, another key piece of their input costs that you don't always see on the farm balance sheet is healthcare and childcare. And so investing in that for rural communities is important for making sure that farmers can take their own human capital and put it to work on the farm. Next slide, please. Talking about those farms, some of those beginning and small family farms, we want to make sure that the programs are targeted appropriately to helping these farms succeed, helping them grow, helping them become the farms of the future. In the farm safety net side, this means looking closely at who faces this risk of those. We saw looking at kind of average, what are the chances of negative net returns for farms going into the future? That varies a lot with farm size. This chart here is adapted from some statistics in the 2022 America's Family Farm and Ranches report, pulling out the percentage of farms, those family farms by size class, where farming is a primary occupation, what percent of them are facing low or negative net income in that year. And we see all farms of all sizes face this risk, right? About 20% of the large farms face this risk. Twice that percentage of the small moderate sales farms face that risk, and 81% of the small low sales farms face that risk. And yet these small farms are oftentimes less likely to be getting government payments. And so trying to figure out where there might be a gap in targeting, where there might be a gap in eligibility, is an important piece for improving those programs going into the future. And these differences across farm size come up in other spaces too. They come up in conservation programs where we look at transaction costs and application barriers. And they come up as we're thinking about program streamlining and trying to build on recent changes within existing programs that are working to reduce the amount of paperwork that it takes to interact with USDA and to get into these programs. Next slide, please. So just to close, when we're talking about farm risk and we're talking about being forward-looking, climate change is a key issue, right? It is a major risk impacting farms today. Syngenta had a recent survey that looked and showed that 70% of farms are concerned about the effect of climate change in the future, and 87% feel that they're experiencing at least some climate impacts today. But climate change is a bit of a glass half full, glass half empty kind of situations for farms and ranches, dairies, working forests. On the glass half empty side, they are facing greater risk. Weather shocks are becoming more frequent and more extreme. The chart we have here is from the National Climate Assessment. It's showing the expected % change in extreme precipitation. And everywhere in the country, is seeing some increase in extreme precipitation. If we look at the change in drought map, it's going to look similar, right? And so those are the sort of local impacts from climate change. Those changes are happening around the globe as well. And so even when you don't get those shocks locally, you often end up with increased price risk because of that volatility around the world. On the glass half full side, though, the good news is that farmers are well positioned to be part of the solution. There are a lot of things they can do to sequester more carbon in the soil and in the trees, a lot of things they can do to reduce their own greenhouse gas emissions. They're often working very closely with their commodity organizations and with their suppliers to look at the emissions along the entire supply chain. And importantly, we're still using the voluntary incentivized programs that are the foundation of our working lands conservation policy. And we've seen big investments in this space through the Inflation Reduction Act and the Climate Smart Commodities programs. We just got, within the last week or two, information from USDA on what that first tranche of funding looked like in terms of the sign up, and we saw overwhelming interest from farmers. Many of the programs were 75 or 80% oversubscribed, meaning that you've got a bunch of farms and ranches and forests lined up for next year's tranche of funding. And so it's a huge success, showing that farmers are extremely interested in being part of the solution to this problem. Next slide, please. So that concludes the things that I wanted to bring to the discussion today and talk about. And I just want to say to you all in the Farm Bill community, thanks for your continued input for the 2023 Farm Bill. And we look forward to getting more over the coming months.
Thank you again, Stephen, for joining the discussion today, and again helping round out 3 of the 4 corners of the Ag committees in a very busy and difficult environment with Congress right now, between appropriations bills and potential shutdown, Farm Bill negotiation, and at least a few other dozen things. Real quick housekeeping reminder before we jump to our last panelist: if you have questions, put them in the Q&A so we can keep track of them and try to get to those as quickly as we can. And with that, we will turn over to our final presenter and panelist for today, Dr. Joe Outlaw. Joe is a Farm Foundation Roundtable Honorary Life Member, and he's the recipient of the 2023 R.J. Hildreth Public Policy Award. He is a Regents Fellow, professor, and extension economist in the Department of Agricultural Economics at Texas A&M University. He also serves as the co-director of the Agricultural and Food Policy Center, or AFPC, at Texas A&M. And in this role, Joe is frequently interacting with members of Congress, key agricultural committee staff, provides feedback, and a lot of research and analysis and outreach and work around the policy changes and consequences and issues. So a better expert is hard to find. Joe, welcome to the panel, and the floor is yours.
Thank you. We good to go here? Okay, so one of the things that's going to be different on my end is that I didn't want to do slides. I thought by the time I sat through 4 people talking about the same thing, likely I wasn't going to say anything new on slides. So I wanted to give you some perspective from a guy that's been doing this. I started doing this work in 1986, and maybe by the time we finish, you'll say, "Boy, you should call it quits because you don't have anything new to add." But hopefully you can see that I have a little bit of perspective that others haven't provided yet, and that these farm bills, again, they're the biggest give and take in the ag community that we have to deal with. And when I say that, it's critical that people understand that we've done this, 90 plus years, and they've never been easy. That's the one thing I really wanted to make sure everybody understands. The farm bills are hard to do because you've got people from both sides of the aisle, both sides of Congress, that have different priorities. And so this is kind of a melding of priorities. And over my career, in general, the Democrats have been really supportive of food programs and conservation programs. Not that they don't support the other side, the Title I, the producer payments. But when you tend to have different groups saying that they want to protect certain areas. Like in general, over my 40-year career, basically Republicans have been really focused on the safety net, Title I specifically. As far as my role at Ag and Food Policy Center, we've for 40 years we've been doing work behind the scenes for Congress, doing analysis and trying to provide more informed debate. It's not our role to generally step out and say this is good or bad at all, but oftentimes we're just a support mechanism that provides data and provides maybe a sounding board that they don't get from outside Washington. The second thing I wanted to say, and actually John Newton said this as well, but I have for many years and talked to thousands upon thousands of farmers, and they're constantly asking me about farm bills and why we do all this stuff. And you know, you don't work as hard as the staff is doing right now trying to get bills together. You don't work that hard if you're not trying to protect them when things go bad. Obviously, prices are good. They have been good for a couple of years now. And so the safety net kind of went away. And that's the way, by design, we have a countercyclical safety net that when things go bad, the government steps in pretty significantly. When things are good, the government kind of takes a step back and lets the market function. And so that's a really important thing for people to remember, is that all this safety net Title I discussion, we can talk about conservation, we can talk about climate change, all those things within the context of the Farm Bill. But when you look at the safety net side, it's all about the bad times. And frankly, as a couple of people have alluded to, the bad times are coming. They're just not here right now. And so it really makes it, I've been quoted across the press quite a bit recently saying that this is a terrible time to do a Farm Bill. One, all the things going on in Washington, and I don't want to reiterate that, but two, the conditions are good. And if you've done 8 farm bills like I have, or been involved in them, you see that they're a little bit easier to get things moving when there's some sort of crisis in Washington. And there's not one right now in terms of the ag producers' perspective, their incomes. There's different elements of that are in better shape. So I'm going to focus a little bit more on the safety net. And specifically, I'm going to be talking about, when we talk about Title I of the commodity programs, Title 11 is crop insurance. So those are the two primary legs of the three-legged stool of the safety net, other being the loan program, which basically loan rates right now are so low, they're irrelevant. So there's not much support provided by it. But so the two main titles, obviously, right now you have most people would say, if you ask producers, saying that crop insurance has been the biggest part of their safety net, and for very good reasons. And people need to understand why. Most of the crop insurance programs use futures prices to set the base price for insurance, the beginning price, and prices have been high, so they've been protected very well on their commodities. Now, on the other side of that, and you don't think about it right now, but when prices decline, as John mentioned, and even Jonathan mentioned earlier, when prices are forecast to decline, producers are going to get a lot less protection from their crop insurance, and the cost of the crop insurance program is going to go down because the liability goes down. And so it gets where right now Title 11 crop insurance is the name of the game, but for basically 90 years plus, we've had commodity program payments. We do, in this country, we do have 23 covered commodities. Those covered commodities have been deemed by policymakers, as the ones that need the protection in this country. Obviously, crop insurance covers a lot more crops, like Stephen alluded to. When you think about one of the things that I always want to make sure that people understand is producers are not they're not sitting on a pile of cash. And so the safety net needs to be bankable. What does that mean? That means that when they go to get a loan, the lenders are going to ask them, where's the protection? I can't give you a loan if there's basically unlimited loss here, because that's too much risk for the banks, and they're not going to do it either. And so when you start talking about bankable protection, it's really an important concept of, is the safety net going to step in if things go bad? To what degree? How is that going to work? How's it going to work for this crop versus the other one you might be choosing to produce? And so that really is a concept that matters quite a bit. One of the things that has come up over time, and most people don't remember this, but the CSP program, which is a very popular conservation program we had in this country, it was initially not the conservation security program. It was initially the conservation stewardship program. And it was mostly going to be looked at as a design to move away from commodity payments to something that's much more closer to what we're looking at, carbon type payments. Basically, that what we found was that you've got to get the payments up to a level that matter. And that's one of the things I wanted to say. And I've seen the question and answers, and I've seen the chat that's going on here today. And you have people asking about carbon payments and things like that. And you know, why are producers so keen on a higher reference price? And it's pretty simple to put in context. Producers right now in this country, if you go out and you do the right practices so that you can earn a carbon credit, you might get in the range of $20 an acre. That's kind of on the high end, depending upon how much carbon you could sequester in your particular soils. A 50-cent increase in the reference price on a normal corn crop is $125 an acre. And that's just a lot more protection. And so when you start looking at why people want certain parts of the Farm Bill, want things done a certain way, that's really has to do a large part of it. And in terms of this Farm Bill, there's nothing normal about this particular one, because for most Farm Bills, in general, most of them are baseline bills. What does that mean? That means the existing money that's available is all you get to do the bill. In my career, there's been two that weren't baseline bills. The 2002 Farm Bill injected billions of dollars additional money to make that a stronger safety net. And then in 2008, there was a small addition that was added to that bill that was kind of earmarked. So it really wasn't funds for all. It was kind of a specific need. So basically, when you start looking at doing these farm bills, you're wondering about, is the baseline big enough? And frankly, it's not. One of the reasons why is because price has been high, and the baseline's driven, the price is driven largely by payments. And have they been making payments, or they're projected to be making payments? So when you start doing this, you start go, well, what are we going to do to do this farm bill? And this has been the biggest problem. And the staff probably, if they were to be polled after this is all over with, what's the biggest headache, is trying to find additional funds within the context of all the rules that go on in Washington. And right now, really with, the sources of funds are very limited. You can steal from another program, but those people have priorities that they don't want their money stolen from, and nor should they want it stolen. Or some sort of redirection of, hey, we can't get all this funding spent. And that's what people talk about IRA a lot, the conservation funding there. People are saying, well, if you can't get all the money spent, can we redirect it to something else? Obviously, these bills are passed and the programs are put in place, and no one wants to move funding from pot to pot. But those are the kind of the things you're left with. I keep hearing that we're going to redirect unused COVID funds. Great. I don't have any idea how much that is, but so the sources of funds for folks to do really meaningful changes in the Farm Bill are really limited at this point. I want to summarize it by saying this. Washington is in my career, this is one of the bigger messes that we've been in, I think, because of you have a situation where the compromise is going to be very difficult to achieve. If there is compromise, you might lose the Speaker of the House. If there is compromise, there are going to be people who are going to be unhappy. And so that is a difficult time to be doing a farm bill. And like it or not, people will usually come together and go, you know what, I kind of support this, but I can see your point of view. But right now in Washington, that's happening less and less over time. And so it makes it very difficult. The debt ceiling deal passed earlier this year put everything behind the 8 ball in terms of get the farm bill done. When I saw the outcome of the debt ceiling, I said I didn't think we'll get a farm bill for a couple of years. I still stand by that. It has nothing to do with the hard work that the people on this Zoom or have. They're putting in the time. It has everything to do with politics. The appropriations process right now and the funding of the government, obviously that's not helping anything in terms of getting a farm bill done, getting any floor time or anything like that. The environment in the House, pretty tough situation. It's not to say that the people who are worried about farm bills are not still focusing on it, but it just says it's going to be tough. So I want to close with the fact that yes, it would have been nice for the four corners to all have been here. The majority in the House is actually going to be the lead on this farm bill when it does go to conference, and they will have a big, strong voice when that happens. So I will end with that, and hopefully there will be some questions come of this. Thank you, Jonathan.
Thank you, Joe. Although I got to tell you, I was ready to get into this Q&A, and then you hit me with, we got a couple more years of farm bill. So I almost fell down and rolled around on the ground in agony. So here we're going to get the panelists back on, and we're going to get into the audience Q&As. But I'm going to kick it off a little bit while everybody gets resituated. And Joe, I'm going to pick on you first, because I do think both you and John make this point about the bad times of what farm policy sort of is responsive to, and this countercyclical nature of the payments which come up and which trigger up and down depending on prices. And what I want to focus on, Joe, with you, so you've got this incredible database of farms that you all use to help analyze policies and what's going on. And really a lot of this, the bad times, there's a lot of management questions that go into the farm management side of getting through bad times. And so maybe just step back a minute from the nuts and bolts of the policy. Give us some bigger picture perspectives for farms managing through increased costs, high prices, different crop mixtures, and sort of where the payments fit in, and a good sense of here's farm management kind of 101. What are you telling farmers? How do you see it in that perspective? And then we'll jump to some audience questions.
Sure.
Thanks.
No, that's a really good question. And obviously the database of farms that we have represents 775 different producers across this country in 22 different states. So we have a lot of perspective. I get a lot of perspective on a daily basis. They'll call and email me and tell me when they see something I've said in the press they don't agree with. I get a lot of feedback. So one of the things that you need to understand, and I think Stephen mentioned it earlier and the Economist spoke, our safety net programs have nothing to do with the cost of production currently. And that's one of the biggest things the biggest thing that I get asked about. And the thing that you have to really consider right now is because they don't have any tie to the cost of production. That's why people are saying that the reference price increase needs to be taken into consideration. But in terms of adjustments, and one of the chat questions I saw said, why don't producers just grow something else? And the answer is pretty simple. They will within a certain complex. If you look at the Midwest where you're from, it's corn and soybeans and some other stuff occasionally, but it's really corn and beans, right? And that's for many, many years, that's been the bread and butter. And it should be doing that. Well, I'll just take another example of down in Texas. We have a lot of cotton, obviously, and that is very, very specific equipment. So if you buy a cotton stripper for $1 million, something that helps you harvest your cotton, you cannot use it for anything else other than a paperweight because it doesn't transfer. And so just understand that in big time production agriculture, there are some minor shifts that producers can do to manage, hey, this crop isn't quite very profitable. I'm going to go with this one. We see it all the time. The Midwest can do corn and beans, and their producers are constantly guessing at which one is everybody going to produce this year, so I can produce the other one and get a little bit higher price. There's all those gives and takes going across. But in terms of farm management, what you would do, I think that we are as lean and mean in this country's agriculture as you could possibly get. What does that mean? That means that because we have this database of costs, these people are pushing on the very edge of low-cost production. They'll adopt technology. They're very much early adopters of technology so that they can be low cost. And to be low cost, I mean, so we're constantly moving. And when you do that, you tend to move towards larger sizes. And, you know, that's a whole nother debate in this country of large farms versus small farms. But the main thing is, I think that producers they try to be as efficient as they possibly can. They would rather, and you know this just as well as I do, most of the producers would say, I'd rather not have the government involved at all. They would. And my answer to that is, you're right, but the fact of the matter is that most of the other countries around the world have some sort of protections, and why wouldn't we have some sort of safety net? Most people hear the word safety net and they think it's called a guarantee of profit. That is not what we're talking about here. When I say they're getting safety net payments, that means they're making up a portion of the loss that they would have incurred. And so, long-winded answer, apologize for that, but you asked one of those questions. It's one of that people write dissertations on in these types of places, right?
Thank you for doing that, Joe. That was a dissertation level question. I appreciate that. I do want to give our other panelists a chance to weigh in and some thoughts. In particular, as you all, you hear that information coming in and kind of this role of the farm program, countercyclical nature, and farm management, and I think all of you have mentioned the field hearings and the incredible sort of travel that goes into trying to getting national perspective across 350 million acres and all kinds of crops. So let's start. I'm looking at my screen. So Stephen, John, and then Emily, if the three of you want to take a chance at responding, and then we'll go to some of the audience questions that we are getting fast and furious over here. Stephen?
Thanks, Jonathan. Yeah, I mean, I think I would chime in on this input cost question. I think we're all excited to see the forecasts for some of the cost of production that'll be coming out next week, and kind of see what the forecasts look like for what 2024 is going to be. We know a lot of the key input costs have come off of their highs from a year ago. And the economy as a whole, inflation is down to about half from its peak. But there are other, we see fuel prices creeping back up a little bit, right? We see the higher cost of capital through the higher interest rates. So, things are moving in a lot of different directions at once. We've come off of the highs, and Joe's right. In most cases, for most of the safety net, things are pegged to the commodity prices, not to the input prices, right? The few exceptions are where we have the margin coverage product in crop insurance and dairy margin coverage. But the commodity prices tend to move with input prices. And when we're trying to look across crops, right, they all face different market conditions, and some of the crops have kind of natural built-in hedges where those input prices and those commodity prices tend to be more correlated. They tend to move together. That has to do with the scale of the market, right? How big is the US in terms of the total global market? Who are the key competitors in terms of exports? Who are the key demanders, right? So each crop, each commodity kind of faces its own set of risks related to the relationship between input prices and commodity prices. And we're trying to work with the programs that we have and make those work. So, maybe for the 2028 Farm Bill, somebody will have grand ideas for how we could move to something with input prices. But the discussion right now is sort of what can we do with the tools that we have in front of us? And again, address these concerns, which are very real that farmers are raising. But taking into account everything we know about the market dynamics and the likelihood of different changes occurring over the next 5 to 10 years.
Thanks, Stephen. John, you got a few thoughts on this as well?
Sure, I can weigh in, then look forward to questions from the audience. I think certainly one size doesn't fit all in agriculture in terms of, their risk management needs. But consistently, everywhere we've been, producers have said and talked about the impact of high input costs and the need to address the Title I safety net. Senator Boozman was in Delaware yesterday visiting with a poultry farmer. She has chicken houses, raising corn and beans. And from the perspective I got from staff that were there is the stress is real. They're leveraged up to their eyeballs. Costs are going up. Insurance costs are going up. Interest rates are going up. We've got to do something to help these producers in the event that things get worse, as Joe mentioned. And now's the time to do it. We want to make sure that this farm bill addresses the safety net and risk management tools that producers need, so that over the next 5 years, they've got a viable risk management program they can depend on. And if you look back, I mean, the 18 Farm Bill didn't help us during the pandemic. It didn't help us, as Stephen mentioned, when tariffs were put on some of our agricultural products. Matter of fact, the PLC support price for soybeans never triggered when their biggest buyer left the market. So in the face of some of these black swan events, when your safety net program doesn't work, Congress had to step in and deliver records amount of ad hoc support. That tells any economist that we've got to make these safety net tools work better. We've got to make sure that crop insurance is affordable. And that's Senator Boozman's priorities, looking at all the tools in the toolbox. As Joe mentioned, make sure that they're bankable so that when these producers go to the bank, they can get a loan. And that brings jobs to rural America. It protects rural America. And when you go across rural America, as Senator Boozman's done, agriculture is about all there is. And this is an opportunity to protect that rural economy and make a very, very historic and significant investment in this farm bill.
Thanks, John. Emily, if I can turn to you and maybe even pull in an audience question a little bit for this. Certainly you can answer the management question, but one of these audience questions is about management and fertilizer in particular, and whether there's opportunities or incentives to improve fertilizer management. And I think this might go to some of the conservation things you discussed. So I want a chance for you to maybe pull those two together, and then we'll look at some of the other questions here. Thank you.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks for that one, Jonathan. So to start out with the first question, we have been hearing the same things about input prices, and especially quite a bit from like my boss's area in Georgia. And we are trying to make sure that we're continuing to support the safety net in a way that covers all of our bases, including some of the environmental pieces that will help make fertilizer use a little bit more sustainable, and also by decreasing the amount of inputs necessary, hopefully a little bit cheaper as those prices go up. I believe there are some conservation programs, and actually I'll pass it over to Stephen as well for details on the IRA, because he has quite a bit of background on that. But we also have members asking for increases in research on fertilizer and soil carbon capture. And I think that moving forward in these areas will be helpful for farmers in the long run as well.
Thank you, Stephen. You've been in the ball here.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of emphasis among the members in our caucus in terms of making sure that the historic investment of the IRA in both conservation and the energy space and the forestry space is really protected. And, it is full steam ahead in terms of getting those contracts signed, getting that investment on the ground. And so what we've seen in terms of, as I mentioned in the first year of implementation, is that USDA has really stepped up in terms of being able to get the staff on the ground and interact with the stakeholders and make that investment happen. And so there's not a desire to hit pause on that. That the challenges it's dealing with, as I talked about, are coming over the future decades. And so it is really hopefully a down payment on that kind of investment in terms of, addressing the extremes, the weather extremes, the climate extremes that are going to be coming for the next generation of farmers, and how can we reduce that impact? And the R&D is a big piece of that too, right? We know a big piece of the research challenge is figuring out what the cropping systems and the cropping, the seeds, everything are going to be coming forward. And as Emily highlighted, we're in a race in that research space against some of our key competitors. And so that, in terms of the long-term safety net, is a critically important investment.
Thanks, Stephen.
Jonathan, can I jump in on that one?
You certainly can, John.
Just because the Inflation Reduction Act, that's $40 billion, right, across forestry, rural development and the climate smart priorities on the conservation title. But the challenge here, and I think everybody knows it, farm bills are meant to be bipartisan. They're historically bipartisan. I mean, anybody that's been in the committee room knows they sit elbow to elbow. They work on farm policy. They get things done for urban and rural America. The Inflation Reduction Act was not bipartisan. We didn't have a single hearing about how to spend $40 billion. Republicans didn't have any input on how to spend $40 billion. Farmers didn't have any input on how to spend $40 billion. So you talk about fertilizer management and the priorities there. That's not climate smart. So you can't use your $40 billion to do that. And I think Senator Boozman's priority is if we're going to move those resources, it will be in a bipartisan fashion as part of a bipartisan farm bill that we can reach agreement on.
So John, can I ask you on that point, is there opposition to increasing the funding for the conservation programs that are bipartisan, have been bipartisan authorizations? Is that, maybe you can help me understand a little bit more the partisan concern with that funding, or did I misunderstand what you mentioned?
No, I mean, Senator Boozman was pretty clear over the last few weeks that, with the IRA dollars, bringing it into the Farm Bill in a bipartisan fashion, meeting the conservation and local resource concerns around the country is something that he supports. We're not talking about taking the IRA and using it for reference prices. We're talking about making sure that it can benefit all the local resource needs that producers have on the ground. And I'll give you an example. Manure storage facilities in New York, big dairy state, helps keep the water clean, not eligible for the IRA funding. There are examples like that all around the country. Senator Boozman was in Delaware last week. Lots of natural resource concerns in Delaware around the watershed. We need conservation dollars for those efforts. They're not eligible under the IRA. So I think Senator Boozman was very, very clear his position on that. I appreciate you bringing that up so we had the opportunity to clarify.
And I want to give Emily and Stephen a chance on that question as well with IRA. And then Joe, I'm going to tee you up next because there's a great history question in here about parity and supply management. So Stephen, Emily, if you want a chance to respond on that, and then I want to get to Joe and let's tie a little bit of history back into the supply management question that we have before us. Go ahead, Emily, Stephen.
I'll just make one quick comment on that in terms of the issue of eligibility, what is and isn't eligible for the IRA funding. We fully expect that to be dynamic. The initial list of what was in there for the 2023 sign up for the IRA funding was set by USDA this year. And I know they're working with partners, talking with stakeholders, thinking about what they have on the ground in terms of technical assistance resources to get the practices out there. So it's not that the list of eligible practices is necessarily going to be static over the coming years as that funding rolls out.
Yeah, and I'll just add here that I think there is more room for continued bipartisan conversation over on the House side too. We're definitely in a different dynamic because the Senate has perhaps been working a little bit more closely on that conversation and have general goals that maybe align a little bit more. But it's a conversation we're continuing to have, and I expect it to develop as we get closer to a final bill.
Thanks to you both. So Joe, I couldn't ignore this one. This is great. Why not recreate parity with supply management so the prices come from the market, not the taxpayer, and prices are in line with actual cost of production? So this has got some great history behind it. Go ahead.
Okay, I want to jump to one thing that was said earlier that I kept my mouth shut on, and I don't want to keep it shut any longer. The question about fertilizer and being more efficient, that is very insulting question to the producers. Just like you as a normal taxpayer, a normal consumer, don't buy a bunch of groceries and throw them away because they're cheap. Producers are in this country are the most efficient in the world, or trying to be the most efficient in the world. They don't waste fertilizer. It costs money. They're already doing a great job. Now, we saw with the doubling of the fertilizer price that people shifted to soybeans, which you don't have to fertilize as much with nitrogen. But anyway, so back to your question. Sorry with that rant, but I get that question a lot, and frankly, it's insulting to the producers. because they're trying their best to be the most efficient they can be. So back to grandpa time here, I guess, is talking about the past. The parity concept is from the 1910 period, and that was giving farmers commodities the same purchasing power as commodities had back then. So if we went to the parity concept, things would be very expensive. This time of year, USDA by law actually has to develop the parity prices for all the commodities. You'll see that published if they haven't already put it out. But they do it every year. And especially the farm bill year gets to be important, so the press can latch on to look at, we're going to pay $20, $30 a gallon for milk or whatever under parity. And along with parity, to make it kind of work, you had supply management. And we've had supply management in this country all the way up until basically 1990 was the last farm bill that had supply management considerations in there. And one of the things that supply management does, it reduces how much is produced, so that the market, and the question was accurate, the market will result in higher prices because we restrict the supplies. And that works really good when you're the low-cost producer that supplies the world for crops like we have been in corn and beans, but we are no longer. So it's a good question to ask, because last year, most people in this Zoom probably don't realize, but Brazil passes, in 1985, they passed this as being the #1 exporter of soybeans. And then in 2022, they passed this as being the #1 exporter in corn. And so the dynamic is hugely different in terms of when you put these programs in place, you're going to have higher prices for everyone. And that's one of the things that we get accused in this country with all the policies we've had recently, is we get accused of having a cheap food policy, not an expensive food policy, which supply management would basically be doing that. So to kind of form a little nexus of the solution for you, I think that in a world market, if you start restricting supplies, you're just going to give up your markets to other producers, and you're going to result in higher food prices for everybody. And so one of the things of being old is kind of good, where you see all these policies get used, and sometimes we have to admit that wasn't really the best thing. And that's really the big scare on not getting a farm bill done, is we're going to have allotments and parity prices if we don't get a farm bill done or an extension. So I know I rambled a bit there, Jonathan, but you're a historian too. So you're not as old, but you're a historian. Did I miss something there?
No, I like the grandpa time perspective. That's fantastic. So we'll add that title for you as well. But certainly a good overview. We have tried that. We have tried price support mechanisms that have to be coupled with the supply management, and many of the problems you mentioned, giving markets away. And historically, also, it didn't work. I mean, you couldn't control supplies. We only did it usually through acres, and you couldn't control supplies. So a couple of thoughts on that. And I'm not supposed to be answering questions, so sorry about that. We do have one, and this goes back to, we'll try to build through a couple of the audience questions. Again, if you have them, please put them in the Q&A so I can try to track them here a little bit. We have a question just asking what the cost would be if reference prices were increased 10 to 20%. And I don't know, this probably goes to Stephen, John, or Emily, if you all have some estimate or some thought about what that cost might be, if you want to share that. Don't everybody jump at once. John, you got a cost on that one? We'll start with you. 10 to 20%?
I think we're still working with CBO to get our scores. Appreciate it though, Jonathan.
Stephen or Emily, anything you want to add to that one?
Yeah, I guess I would echo what John's saying, and I would say you can get a score on if that's the only thing you're doing, but realistically, in terms of modernizing and enhancing the safety net, you're looking at changing more than one thing at once, and these things interact. And so to have a conversation on sort of what the score is going to be, you really need to look at the full package of what the changes are going to be. And I think in our discussions with stakeholders, commodity groups, farmers, right, they understand this too, right? You can ask them what they think about pulling one lever or another lever, and they will say, well, what other levers are you going to be pulling, right? Because they understand it all interacts.
Emily?
Yeah, I think we're in the same boat. We don't have a specific price tag of something that we're very set on considering.
All right. Joe, do you want to hazard a guess on what it costs? I don't want to leave you out of the guessing game here.
Well, I mean, we have scoring models just like everyone else, and 10% increase in our models. Again, nothing else changing. Like Stephen said, the things are interrelated, but nothing else changes. Ours would then be in the $20-ish billion range for a 10% increase across the 23 covered commodities. And if you go to a 20% increase across all of them, then you would get somewhere in the $50 billion range. And again, as was mentioned earlier, the ERP has really changed the game on this thing, because there are certain commodities, because their prices have increased, that they're going to get big increases in the reference prices with Congress doing nothing, because that's current law. And specifically, you look at corn and beans, and even wheat's going to get an increase, sorghum. But it's not across the board. So it's that's where you get to where people looking at things differently, because some already going to get an increase, some are got nothing, and they don't have any prospects for help, like rice, for example.
All right, so I got to break through the acronym alphabet soup for a moment. You said ERP, so I don't know if you want to explain the ERP or the escalator provision. Like Stephen, John, somebody else mentioned that too. If we want to get an explanation of what that is. And
that's good. That's a good one, and I apologize, because ERP in Washington is used for two different things now. There is ERP, the emergency disaster program type thing that we have, ad hoc program. And then there's ERP, the effective reference price, which is what I was referring to. And with some commodities prices having moved up, and it's by formula, the previous 5 years, Olympic average, you can get an effective reference price. And some of them this year are going to have really nice increases. And that's one of the things. You got the haves and the have-nots based on what's going on with markets. And so there's probably different commodities would have different pressure for a reference price increase because of that.
And do we know which commodities are getting that increased reference price through the effective reference price? Do we have a breakdown?
Yeah, if I had done my homework, I could put the chart up, but there's less than half of the 23 covered commodities. Yes.
Okay. I want to make sure everybody else, Stephen, Emily, or John, if you have any to add to that, otherwise we'll jump to another question. And I'll tee up the next question in case you want to take the pass. We got some research questions that I want to bring up on this. So if you want to talk about the effective reference price, please do. Otherwise, we'll switch over. Give me a thumbs up if you want to go. Oh, seeing none. Historically, research provides an excellent ROI, or return on investment. Can this anticipated return be used as an offset to the increase of funds available for research? So this is kind of another one of these scoring questions. Can you factor in that the return on the investment for research could cover the additional costs of investing in research? If I ask that correctly, and it makes sense. Emily, you want to start us off with that one?
Jonathan, before Emily, can you hire that person at CBO right now?
Seriously. That's a great way to look at this, but I have a feeling, Emily, you're gonna crash the good feelings and vibes of that idea.
Unfortunately, that won't work. I think we would all love it if it were an option, but the rate or the return on investment doesn't come directly back to the government. So it is public funding of money that taxpayers are bringing in, but the benefit ends up coming directly to our pieces to the research community, pieces to businesses and other companies who are working with technology, and also directly to farmers when they're able to take the investments and results of research that didn't exist previously. And those are all a piece of that number, but unfortunately, we can only count something that directly affects the government budget as an offset.
Thanks, Emily. And that is Stephen and John's point on that too. That's the statute, the way the statute requires the scoring. Is that correct, Stephen? I'll let you add to this, and John, if you want to put some more finer points on it. Not CBO's fault necessarily, but the way the statute is.
Yeah, I would just echo Emily's point that when we're looking at the returns on investment in research and in a lot of areas of the title, right, a lot of the benefits are kind of off the book, if you will, in terms of CBO keeping track of federal outlays. And so you always want to have an eye on kind of what the benefits to the public and the taxpayer are of these programs and the benefits to farmers and rural communities.
John, do you have anything you want to add? Otherwise, I've got another research question here highlighted. We can go to that if we want.
No, I think they've covered it very well.
All right, so we'll start with you on this one. Appreciate hearing the recognition of the need to invest in research, particularly given that it's not kept pace with our competitors, such as China. Also recognize the challenges of funding availability. What advice does the panel have for making this a priority and getting increased funding in research? John, do you want to start us off with that and see if anybody else has some clever scoring ideas for this?
I don't have a clever scoring idea. I certainly wish I did. You know, it's not just research. You know, it's trade, it's MAP and FMD funding. I mean, there's so many needs in agriculture, and I think Senator Boozman said this. He wants to put the farm in the Farm Bill, and that means making the investments in research, making the investments in agricultural trade, so that we don't have historically large trade deficits, and then making the investments in the risk management tools that producers depend on. You think about broadband across rural America. I mean, there's so many needs in the Farm Bill to benefit farmers and ranchers in rural America, not just the research title, but again, we have an opportunity to do that, this Farm Bill, to make those investments, and I think we can do that.
Stephen, over to you, and then Emily, if you have.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is one of those cases where John mentioned that, you know, the staff has been working kind of together through dozens and dozens of meetings, title by title, and it's exactly what he said. There are lots of needs, there are lots of discussions to be had across the titles and across the programs, and the challenge is, you know, as Joe laid out in the current environment, figuring out how to meet those needs. So.
Emily?
Yeah, definitely echoing both Stephen and John about overall needs in the Farm Bill. I think when we talk about research specifically, this is one of the most bipartisan areas and bipartisan titles of the Farm Bill, which sounds really promising, but it also takes into account top line numbers. And while research is really, really important to continue to invest in the future of farmers, and we need to continue to develop tools so that farmers and ranchers and small communities are able to use them, we can't leave farmers right now high and dry. And we need to make sure that we invest enough money in other areas that serve them now so that those farmers are still there when the return on investment of that research happens. So it really is a balancing game, and we have to figure out how we can continue to move forward and push in that direction while at the same time keeping enough resources in the here and now, so that our agriculture industry doesn't die out or look extremely different by the time we're able to realize those investments.
Stephen, any additional comments on? All righty, so we got some questions here about trade. I'm going to try to blend a few of these. So trade is not directly in the jurisdiction of the ag committees, but we do invest in certain trade related programs. So what I want to do is talk about what the Farm Bill invests in around trade issues. And then Joe, wrap it up with you on this question about some of the impacts of these global markets and kind of how we factor that in both to the trade type policy, but also our farm management policies. So I think, Stephen, we'll start with you on the trade investments in a farm bill. Let everybody kind of take a comment on that. And then Joe, we'll wrap around to you on that.
Sure. I think one of the key areas of trade investment is really on the area of market development, and making sure that we're opening up new markets. We're adapting to changing conditions in the global environment, and giving our producers as broad a base of markets across the world as they can, which is an important risk management strategy is too, right? The more countries you're engaged with and sailing to, the more markets you're in, the less a shock in a single market impacts you. So I think the trade promotion piece of it is extremely critical.
John, you want to pick it up from there?
Sure. I mean, I think Stephen, is exactly right. We need access around the world. But what we also need is better access. That means we need to reduce the barriers to trade. And that's something that we're not doing right now. And Senator Boozman, he travels to Asia quite a bit. And he says, when I visit with those countries, they want to buy our agricultural products. They want to de-risk themselves from China, so to speak. But we're not over there reducing the barriers to trade. And I think that's something that all of agriculture wants. All the ag groups that come in and visit with us talk about doubling MAP and FMD funding. I think we hear that loud and clear. And again, that all comes back to making the investment in this farm bill to all the various needs of our stakeholders.
Emily, anything you'd like to add on the trade discussion and maybe some of the competitive advantages we have here too?
Yeah, of course. So with MAP and FMD, like Stephen and John both mentioned, that investment in market development will help us continue to break into markets. We also see some really important technical assistance happening for different segments of the agriculture sector, including like task and specialty crops, which is a program that we've heard a lot of feedback about. And I think that we're also limited in resources here, which is a common theme in every single one of my answers. But this is an area that we would like to continue to invest in. The US and farmers here do a really great job of growing some of the most efficient, high quality crops in the world. And there is a market and a need for many of the things that we're growing across the world. And so if we're able through Farm Bill programs to continue to support those, that is something that we're really excited about.
Thank you. Joe, some big picture economist perspective. We've invested in these markets. Give us some thoughts on trade deficits, agriculture, and the impact that has for our farmers.
Sure. And one of the things, thank you. I think that within trade, we have the U.S. has got this probably naive goal of free trade, and what we find is around the world, free trade means different things to different people, and it's really not free trade at all. It's trade whenever they feel like it. Trade. So as an example, I'll just say that we have. I have been a part of 2 foundational studies funded by commodity groups to look at the practices in India and China. And so those particular commodity groups funded us to do some work to see if we could find some things that they could turn over to our trade representative's office. And we did find it. And they've since ruled we've got a finding against India and a finding against China on particular things. But what I bring that up to say that our country has not been very aggressive in going after these folks, and it's taken the commodity groups to kind of put their own money where their mouth is to kind of go after people. when they've been feel like they're being wronged. So in the big picture, we love to think that everybody was going to treat everyone fairly, and we could, you know, who needs products, whoever can provide them at the lowest price, they're going to provide those products around the country. And in general, that works. Economics actually works most of the time, but then you do have countries that I'd say, just like China right now, that is going to buy most of their stuff from Brazil. And there's all kinds of geopolitical reasons for that. And we've got to find other markets.
Thank you for that. And we are about towards the end of our time. So if there's any really pressing questions, get them in right away. But I do think I'm going to use one that came in earlier. And we hear a lot about the problems in DC, the challenges for Congress, shutdown, and so forth. But we've also talked about the bipartisan nature of farm bills. So maybe we can take panelists, give us some perspective on the things where we have agreement amongst chairs and rankings, where there seems to be some solid ground to work on. This is kind of like our port in the storm, right? Give us some hope that there's something that we can get done here, because there is a pretty strong amount of agreement in some areas. And maybe start us off with that. Stephen, I'm just going to start with you on that. Give us a point or two of agreement, then John, then Emily, and then Joe. If we got time, maybe we got a final couple points on it. So Stephen, go ahead.
I think the biggest point of agreement is one you started us off with, Jonathan, and that is that the strength of the Farm Bill coalition historically has been that it is a bipartisan enterprise every go round. Sometimes it takes a little longer to get to the finish line, but there is a strong bipartisan support for getting this done. And I think we've seen that with the chairwoman and the ranking member and their experiences working together over many years. So, we think that strength is something that we can leverage towards getting a finished product.
John, some points of agreement.
I agree entirely with what Stephen said. I think, Senator Boozman, Senator Stabenow have an excellent working relationship. I think staff works very well together. And it is our goal to get a bipartisan farm bill over the finish line. I think we all hear from the stakeholders that come and visit with us on all the various needs that they have, whether it's the risk management tools, whether it's the conservation programs, needs on nutrition. And I think we can achieve everyone's goals as part of a bipartisan farm bill.
Thank you. Emily.
Yeah, we're also really excited about some of the bipartisan work that we've done so far. And I think on the House side as well, we are all on the same page about wanting to help farmers, wanting to continue to serve and fund rural communities. There are definitely some disagreements about the best ways to do that, but we are all united on that same broader goal. And that's something that we'll continue to work on. And there are hundreds of specific programs authorized in the Farm Bill, and we have bipartisan agreement on the majority of those. We still have some big questions left, but I think we remain hopeful and we remain united on the bigger goal.
Thank you. And I think Joe said this as well. And from my cloudy and dated memories of it, there is an enormous amount of work that goes into this. It doesn't reach any public perspective. And so I would extend my appreciation to all of you and your counterparts on the committee staffs for the just incredible amount of work that has to go into it and the work that you still have to do. But I think that's a great point, Emily, and everybody else. Like, there's a lot of areas in which these things get worked out, and then you sort of have to narrow down to what's left. So with that, I think, Martha, we're going to bring you back on. But first, Joe, I'm gonna put you on a spot, since we're the old the grandpa times on this and a little bit removed from it. What do we think timeline? We feel like we get past this government shutdown. You said 2 years earlier. You think we're a two-year
well,
run?
Okay, so yeah, let me quickly. I know we're about to be done. I think if they can come to a conclusion before February, I think they'll do it. The question will be is if everything's shut down and messes everything else up. You got people starting primary start in March. I think that people need to get reelected, and that takes priority. And suddenly, I think we're going to get a big, long extension.
Well, we appreciate that opinion, Joe, and all your work on this as well. It's great. We will not hold you to the February deadline, but I like the sound of at least a February deadline for everybody. With that, thanks to the audience for tuning in and spending time with us here this morning. Thanks to our panelists. And Martha, thanks to you and the Farm Foundation for hosting this. So I hand it back over to you and have a great day.
Great. Thanks, Jonathan. Thank you again to all of our speakers for your insightful discussion. We want to thank you also in the audience for joining us, submitting your questions. We appreciate your engagement with us. We'd love to hear your feedback. So please take a moment to share your comments about today's session in the brief survey you'll see at the conclusion of this forum. For those of you who may not be familiar with Farm Foundation, we wanted to quickly tell you about our suite of next generation programs, which are designed to nurture emerging food and agricultural leaders. Farm Foundation Next Generation programs are unique in that they connect young, promising leaders to a broad network of professionals, offering them a well-rounded view of every step of the food supply chain. This year, we are celebrating our first decade of Farm Foundation's Next Generation programs and invite you to join us in our inaugural Next Gen Giving Week campaign to help us continue and deepen these programs. Check the link provided in the chat to learn more about this campaign. Each and every gift to Farm Foundation strengthens our ability to address rapidly evolving issues impacting agriculture, the food system, rural communities, and we are so grateful for your support. Thank you once again for joining us today. We look forward to seeing you at our next forum, which will be held on November 7th on the topic of innovation in gene editing and plant breeding, a look at scientific advancement and consumer perspectives in food and agriculture. We'll send you a registration link with the survey email you'll receive shortly. Thank you, and we'll now conclude today's forum.